Lord, you know that I'm not feeling very well. This is no mystery to you. And these allergies through the things that you've created are problematic sometimes. But I pray, Lord, that through this time and through my weakness, that you would speak to us in ways that bring heaven's peace in very real, tangible ways into this earth and into our lives and into our families, into our workplaces, into our schools. You are the God of peace, and you give the peace of God. And we want to be able to move in your rhythms to be able to experience and to give that peace. And so to that end, Lord, I pray that you would use me and that you use this time in your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we've said this over and over again throughout our study, and we're coming, I think we got 2 more messages in Philippians, and then we're done. And that'll be 22 messages in 4 short chapters. And I particularly have enjoyed this because Philippians is so rich. It's so condensed, and there's so many beautiful aspects to all of these different things that you turn, like turning a diamond, you see the different facets, and Philippians is very, very rich when it comes to these things. But I think we have been talking about this. I've said this a number of times. Peace is elusive, isn't it? In our culture today, peace seems to be something that's very hard to come by. People are anxious. People are short. I don't mean short. They're like, wow, you know, they're tightly wound. They're tense. They're tensed up. I experienced this a lot over the last 2 years. We went through the pandemic, and trying to lead a church in the pandemic was very difficult and very stressful. Coming out of that, if we're out of that, I think we're out of that, mostly, kind of, sort of, that then we did some remodeling in our house, and that was 4 months of a lot of stress. And if you're ever considering that, just know that it's a very stressful kind of a situation. We didn't have a kitchen for, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. And a lot of people, it's way worse than that. Actually, Jody said that she didn't have a kitchen for 2 years. And I was like, well, I guess that it's all relative, isn't it? Then on top of that, we hosted our daughter getting married. Our last daughter, our youngest, got married. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever, been a part of a wedding on the back end of everything, it's pretty stressful on that whole thing. And not everything went according to plan with that particular wedding, as is particularly true of almost all weddings. Then you add to that, on top of that, a lease negotiation that is out of my wheelhouse. It is not something that I am good at. And so Erin would just get mad in the negotiating process. I would get anxious, really anxious. And that whole thing, it was really hard to grab a hold of God's peace in the midst of all that, with a lot of legitimate things to be anxious about. And I think that as we look honestly at life, there's a lot of legitimate things that are out there that create tension in our lives. Yesterday morning, we had a memorial service here, and I had gone on vacation, thought everything was down, but we didn't have a sound person, and our particular soundboard you have to have a NASA certification for to be able to run it, and so I didn't have a sound person. None of our sound people were available, and I'm at 5 in the morning, like, I am really anxious. I'm like, I'm talking about peace tomorrow, and I can't find it anywhere. And this is really frustrating. Finally, Stephen Martz bails me out. He's my bacon saver. And so if you see him and you just, hey, Stephen, the bacon saver, you save Bob's bacon and the whole thing. He came in, ran sound for us. The whole thing went great. But I was anxious. This happens to us, doesn't it? That we'll go through seasons from time to time where one taxing thing is followed by another, is followed by another. You add to that, I forgot about this, we also did our taxes, and that's always such a nice thing to do, And so we did our taxes as well. But you have these things where all of a sudden you find yourself getting short with people. Perhaps you're prickly. Maybe your spouse is the one who can discern this most because they're on the receiving end of your prickliness. But we go through these times where we're taxed and we're reactive, and maybe we come home and just kind of, that's the response to what's going on in our lives. We're reactive and we don't know what to do. Our relationships suffer from the tension that brings. Our joy maybe is escorted out the door because joy and peace occupy a very similar territory within us. Have you encountered anything like this? So I'm just being realistic, all right? I'm not trying to be any smokescreen or anything. I'm just like you, maybe worse than you in some things. So, but these are things that people struggle with. And this passage that we're looking at in Philippians chapter 4, and that's where we are this morning, is kind of coming in concert with what Alan preached last week, and that is that we're looking at the peace of God and the God of peace, and how does that work, and what are the, if you will, what are the thoughts and practices for accessing God's peace? As we've seen, the Philippian people have got a number of legitimate reasons to not be at peace. They're getting persecution from the Romans because they have pledged themselves to a different king who is not Caesar. And that is not good in an incredibly nationalistic society like Philippi. You have, on top of that, the Judaizers who are trying to infiltrate the ranks of the church at that point in time, trying to get them to take a very Jewish shape and get them to obey the Jewish laws, and it just doesn't fit them, and it's not a part of the new covenant. But they're confused, and they're really being jacked with in this. On top of that, then you probably have some people that are, I would say, they would be like your Tony Robbins, your American success-oriented people are like, we're going to go from one victory to another victory, and somehow the cross gets lost in this. So it's a victory in Jesus with no cross kind of an idea. And those people are very gifted. Paul deals with them a lot in 2 Corinthians, but they're dealing with this, and they're really confused. On top of that, all three of those things is causing there to be tension in their ranks, and two really prominent influencers, two women, Yodia and Syntyche, are not getting along, and their not getting along is fracturing the body. So there's all kinds of reasons why the Apostle Paul would write the things that he's writing, but he loves these people. He loves them with Jesus kind of love. He has this affection toward them, and so his appeals to them and the way that he reasons with them to get them on the same page, he says, you need some examples of how to behave in these kind of situations. Jesus is the classic example. He's the quintessential example, the model. Look at Jesus. But then also look at Timothy and look at Epaphroditus, and even look at me, he says. And that's kind of a roadmap for you in terms of how to navigate these uncertain times that you're going through. So that brings us into, and I'm going to start reading where Alan started last week, because the section is kind of all one integrated unit. Paul, in verse 4 of chapter 4, says it this way: rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, he says, and this is where we pick up today, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard or even seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Interesting, Paul talks about the peace of God and the God of peace. And in between those two things, you have thoughts. You're thinking. The peace of God and the God of peace, and your thoughts are the, if you will, the sort of the dynamic stuff in between those two commodities. The thoughts, and Paul is giving them the practices of God's peace. Now, I think Paul is dealing with them with their peace stealers, but I want to ask at the very beginning, what are your peace stealers? What steals God's peace from you? Think. What steals peace from you? I just revealed a number of things about my life and things that are overwhelming when it seems like I'm going through something that seems a bit above my pay grade or my skill set. Those things tend to amp me out, and peace tends to exit out the side door, maybe out the front door. What about you? What steals your peace? Again, Paul is dealing with those things. Maybe it's outside pressure like it was for the Philippians. It's just a different kind of outside pressure. Maybe people are putting heat on you to conform to a certain thing, or they want you to think like them. I mean, that's quite a popular thing today, is people want you to think like they think, and there's all kinds of arguments to try to get you on my side. And if you don't agree with that, it's not okay to be in that middle space or to be in a different space. Outside pressure. Another piece for the Philippians was religion. The Judaizers were their cocktail of disaster. But for us, maybe religion for you is that I'm never good enough, that I read the Bible and I just feel like I'm never good enough. And that's religion speaking, not your relationship with God. God is not saying that to you. God is not saying I'm not good enough. God is not saying I can't do this or that you don't belong or any of those things that your soul or the world or any of those things that are being said in you, that's not coming from God. God is saying, no, you do belong. And you change because you belong. You don't change so that you belong. You change because you belong. Really important in that. I think that for the Philippians, our equivalent would be the American successism is haunting you. I'm not, I want, I thought I could, this was my dream. All of those different things, those can steal our peace as well. We can go after all kinds of American dreams that are not God dreams. And yes, you have the freedom to pursue those things, but is God actually behind those things? Is He? See what I'm saying? That the Scripture's got all of these beautiful, in sync things with what's going on in our life. And another one is just conflicts with others. I've just found that this is an incredibly rich with conflict season. All of those things are joy stealers. Those are just the ones that Paul is dealing with the Philippians, and there are an infinite amount of other ones for us. As I look out at you, and I know many of you, I know things that you're struggling with. I know that those things are joy stealers and peace stealers for you. Now you know some of mine. Paul is addressing these things in a really unique and beautiful way. So, first thing, and I want to hit three sort of prelude kinds of points and not dwell on them because Alan tackled them a bit last week, but just to, as the running start in this, the first thing is that God's peace comes with His nearness. Because God is near you and He's the God of peace, you are never alone in whatever you're going through. As much as it feels like I'm by myself in this, it's never the case, ever. You are never alone. But God is near you. Your God who loves you is near you. Secondly, that His peace comes in relationship, in conversation with Him. I love the way that Alan said this last week, that because God is near, we can choose to let our worries turn into prayers. That's a very worthy thing to think about. Let me say that one more time. Because God is near, we can choose to let worries turn into prayers. And then thirdly, by way of preface, that you don't need to have everything figured out to experience God's peace. That's the peace that surpasses all understanding. You don't have to have it all figured out. You can experience God's peace even in the midst of all kinds of question marks and all kinds of unknowns. You can have the peace of God because you have the God of peace. And so that brings us into our first point of the passage coming in from verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever's true, whatever's right. And he gives this thing, and he says, think about these things. And then down at the end, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, that phrase, the God of peace, is used throughout the New Testament. It's a common phrase, but not because it's a common thing to say, but because it is a true thing to say. And that is that peace is part of who God is. Think for a moment with me. Peace is part of who He is. And so when we say God is near, we're talking about the God of peace, and He's the one who is near. That peace comes from Him, and He is near. Now, this word in Greek here in Philippians is really pretty much the same word as shalom is in the Hebrew. The word in the Greek is eirene, and it is this idea not simply of the lack of conflict, although it certainly there infers that, but eirene and shalom is this condition of wholeness, of things being brought into wholeness from alienation and from disjointed and disintegration. It's completeness. It is being at peace. It is being fear-free. So in the Old Testament, when you heard, when you read that God gave them peace on every side, it's that kind of thing, that they were not living in fear of being attacked. This, Irene, this is the peace that God is and that God gives. Peace starts with Him. Would you say that with me? Peace starts with Him. One more time. Peace starts with Him. It starts with the God of peace. If you don't have the God of peace living in you, you will not have the peace of God. It goes with that. It goes with the territory. This is how God has made it. I saw a bumper sticker years ago, and I love this. It was, "No Jesus, N-O, Jesus, no peace." K-N-O-W, Jesus, K-N-O-W, peace. Now that's true, isn't it? That you know Jesus, and so now you have the ability to experience peace no matter what is going on outside of you. And so this is how John writes of Jesus' own words. Jesus says it this way, "I leave the gift of peace with you, my peace. Not the kind of fragile peace given by the world, but my perfect peace. Don't yield to fear or be troubled in your hearts. Instead, be courageous." That's just a paraphrase of what you're used to hearing, but I think it's beautiful. And I need to, excuse me, I'm in a major allergy thing. So could you just pause me for just a sec? Ready? Gotta cling on? All right. That's something, there's certain things you just don't want to hear from your pastor. That's one of them. The God who's near you is the God of peace. The God who is near you is the God of peace. Gosh, I like saying that. The God who is near you is the God of peace. The God who is near you is the God of peace. Are you getting that? Let's say it one more time. The God who is near you is the God of peace. If you forget everything that I said this morning, remember that. The God who is near you is the God of peace. And He doesn't leave, ever. It's like a ship that is at sea, but that is anchored down on the ocean floor with a really stout anchor. And there might be all kinds of stuff going on topside, but the ship isn't going anywhere because the ship is anchored. This is the God of peace and His peace in your life. There's all kinds of stuff that are going on. As Martin Laird would say, you're the mountain, and there's all these weather systems that are going on around you, but those are the weather system, not the mountain. This is the God of peace, and He's with you. So if we want to know the dynamics of peace, we have to know the God of peace because He is the anchor of our peace. Secondly, Paul says that we need to direct our thoughts in the direction of peace. If your thoughts are not directed in the direction that creates peace, you won't experience peace no matter how true everything I say or how true that the Bible is in these things. If our thought life is not in agreement with that, and it is directing our feelings away from that, we will not experience God's peace. So your thoughts and God's peace are very closely related. Now the word here in Greek is logizomai. Can you think of what's similar to that? Logic. Now, he's not saying everything just fits together in a tight little reason package, but what he is saying is that, and the different translations translate this different ways, that there's a thinking that goes in agreement with God and sync with him. There's a filling of our minds. There's a focus of our attention. There's a keep these things in our minds. And so the Apostle Paul in Colossians chapter 2, chapter 3 would say, set your mind on things above, where Christ is. Set your mind on those things. You have a choice. Now, unfortunately, what ends up happening is our thoughts can be sort of runaway trains. Have you experienced this? Hello? Runaway trains, your thoughts are going all over the place, ping-ponging this way, ping-ponging that way. I decided to do a little thought exercise and just take a day and try to observe my thoughts as well as I could during a day. It was not really very impressive. My thoughts were just ping-ponging all over the place. I would think this. It would start to get me anxious. I would, no. I'm not going down that road. I'm going to go down this road, and I would kind of move back in this direction. I'm fasting from sports for Lent. I check ESPN all the time and read myself to sleep at night, reading scores and stats, and it's what my dad and I, the only thing that my dad and I could talk about. I'm fasting sports, but boy, did I think of a lot of sports when I was trying to examine and catalog what my thoughts were going to. I found that my thoughts went in all kinds of different directions, and I had to sort of grab a hold of them and say, hey, that's not the place that we're going. And it made me realize that so frequently for us that our thoughts just ping-pong according to whatever is happening around us instead of us deciding what we're going to think and focusing on that. Is that making any sense to you? All of us, I'm pretty sure I'm not unique in this. I don't think that all of us are just laser focused. And so what does Paul do? He says, I want to give you some things to think about where you can steer your life in this direction. And what I think is kind of profound in this is that these are not all God things. Like I think a lot of times we think, well, we just got to be thinking about God all the time. But that's not what Paul says. He says, these things all have God's fingerprints on them. Think about these things. It's kind of interesting. So I want to just go through these, if you will, thought targets with you for just a moment and look at what are some of the things that you can think about that you can direct your thoughts toward that would be healthy and constructive in a crazy age, in any time in our lives. And these are the things that Paul says. He says, think about those things that are true. Now, obviously, biblical truth is something that you can think about that is capital T truth. But and so you could think about and meditate and reflect on, and I do it every day. I open up the scriptures and I meditate on the word, and I try to take that into my day with me. But that's not the only thing I think about. You could let your mind kind of rest on some of these, what I would call truisms. These things that are true, but they're not biblical. They're not biblical axioms, but they nevertheless are true. I like the truisms like coming from Who Moved the Cheese, that book where they ask a simple question, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? That's a very interesting thing just to think about. Or Eleanor Roosevelt, which was echoed in The Princess Diaries, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Or Teddy Roosevelt, comparison is the thief of joy. Those are truisms, and those are worthy of your thoughts. You could think about those things and turn them around in your mind, and in the turning around in your mind process, you start to change. Paul says, think about those things that are true, those things that are truthful, those things that are honest, those things that are real. Secondly, he says, think about things that are noble, that are honorable, that are dignified. What inspires in us reverence and awe? So, again, just trying to give you some thought targets on this. A sunset. One of the things that Becky and I have done over the years is we're members of the San Diego Zoological Society. We would go down to the Wild Animal Park for an hour or two at the end of the day on Sunday, and then we would go out to our favorite beach, Moonlight Beach, and watch the sunset. And there's something about that that's just, I don't know. Becca, my daughter Becca, she'll text, do you see the sunset? Look at the sunset, and I'll just have to go outside and look at the sunset. It's like, the sunset, the Creator does some just absolutely stunning work. Have you noticed that? Sunsets are just absolutely stunning. And those are things that are noble. Every living thing, we have these hummingbirds that have a little sentry outside, and he owns the tree. And hummingbirds are, I don't know if you've noticed, they're really territorial, but this one hummingbird, I call him the sentry. This tree is his, and he will chase off any other bird, doesn't matter the size. And he is so beautiful and noble. You know, and then I'll be sitting in the backyard, and he'll just... And I'm like, you're so cute. I can't even believe it. I mean, it's not, do you do that? Okay, maybe I'm just a freak, but whatever. Paul says, direct your mind toward what is right, what is in line, in sync with God. Because biblically, righteousness isn't just doing everything right. It is things being set right, things being set to be in sync with God. When you read righteousness in the Bible, you're talking about things being set right by God, especially you and I being set right with God, by God, righteousness. And so when we use that, if you're thinking about what's right, I see I see relationships where mercy is prevailing instead of judgment. And I think, oh, that's beautiful, that's right. I see when people are seeking understanding instead of judging. And I'm just full of admiration and awe because we're seeing something that is set right. We're seeing when someone goes and fixes a relationship that's broken, we're seeing something that is being set right. And Paul says, think about those things. He says, think about those things that are pure, that are innocent, that are void of filthiness. And this one, I've got a lot of different directions that my mind goes, but think about Mother Teresa. Read some of the stuff that she wrote. You know, look at some of the expose. That person is a pure article, and she didn't think she was pure at all. But man, what she did and the thoughts that she had about things. Other people, Teresa of Avila, she's in a long line of Teresas. Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, all of these people have this beautiful purity about them that is worthy of our thinking and in immersing ourselves in. You have the inquisitiveness of a child. The Wileys aren't here this morning, but their son Freddie came up to me at one point in time and in his neat little British accent, and he said, "You work here, don't you?" I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. I do. I work here. I'm an employee here. So, yeah, that'll work. But there's something about that unprotected laughter. I love hearing people when someone laughs just out loud hysterically, or when you see someone dance like no one is watching them or even caring about watching them. It's so beautiful. It's so pure. And I like thinking about those things, but that's what Paul is saying. That's a target. Something that's pure. He says, focus on things that are lovely, that are pleasing, agreeable, attractive. I had wanted to see Rembrandts and different. We were in Europe, and I wanted to go through the art galleries, and it's like after a while, you can only see so many Madonna and child paintings, and they're the ones who are paying for all that. The church was paying for all the paintings at that point in time. That's the only way the artist could make any money. So I'm just like, I'm so tired of Mary and Jesus. And Mary and Jesus, and Mary and Jesus, and plump little Jesus, and Mary and plump little Jesus, and that I just like, I can't take anymore. Then we walk through Rembrandt, and it's all, the Dutch masters are all dark, and it's all very, lots of kind of dark shades and everything like that. And then we walked into the French Impressionist gallery, and it was like, wow, I am a French Impressionist guy. I didn't know that, but I am now. There was something about it that it was like a breath coming into my lungs. It was something lovely. I love looking at my granddaughter's faces. There's something so lovely and pure and beautiful. I even know that this sounds a little twisted, but there's something about humanity in grief. When someone is truly grieving the loss of someone or something, and there's something in their face when they're being honest that's truly beautiful and lovely. And it's hard to describe because I think a lot of times we're like, so you like looking at pain? It's like, no, it's not some sort of weird thing, but there's something beautiful about humanity in all of its humanness, about how God has made us in his image. It's beautiful. It's lovely. And then Paul says, think about things that are admirable. Something or someone, that's deservedly enjoying a good reputation. That is, someone that's doing something honest and honorable and vulnerable. I love it when I see real confession and real contrition with the confession of sin. When their heart is truly broken. When someone faces their music of their own sins and or consequences of their choice. And when they say there's something incredibly admirable about that. There's when people they own what they have done, and I did wrong, and they face the consequences of that. It's an admirable thing. When someone steps aside to elevate someone else, in life in something, there's something beautiful and admirable about that. And I've seen that in so many of you. And if I can say something admirable here that needs to be said, Stephen Martz came and served me and the memorial service that we did yesterday. But it made me think about how many of you have stepped up and served. Andrea, and Dacis, and serving with and babysitting the kid, not babysitting, but doing a kids program so that their parents could go and have a date night. There's something beautiful and admirable about that. Stephen served me and served these people he doesn't even know. And I kept saying, thank you. And he's like, I'm loving this. I got to fly solo. Because he was just learning the board, and he's always had somebody else training wheels, but he liked having the chance to fly solo in that. There's so much beauty in how you guys serve each other. It's beautiful. It's admirable. It's something worthy of thinking about. Paul concludes, I think, with more catch-all in this than anything in particular. He says, whatever is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. That is something that's good and virtuous and upright and true, worth commending and worth approval. As I thought about that, and I was talking with some of my kids about this, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the composer Hans Zimmer, but he wrote the scores for the Pirates of the Caribbean and for Gladiator and for Inception and all these different things. If you ever get a chance to watch Hans Zimmer live in Prague, it's a $5 rental on Amazon Prime at this point in time. It is stunning. A 200-voice choir, a full orchestra, and then his really unique band. And he's doing a collage of all of these scores of all of these movies. It is simply unbelievable. In the overwhelmingness and the beauty of that, in the excellence and the praiseworthiness of that, I would come way down to say that anything that Yo-Yo Ma ever plays on the cello is worthy of that as well. So you hear what I'm saying? I'm just telling you, these are things that come to me. You've got all kinds of things inside of you that if you actually said, I'm going to focus my thinking on these sort of things, there's all kinds of things you could think about besides what you're thinking about. Right? Hello? And I think that it's like these are legitimate targets, and God has said, I want you to think about these things. My fingerprints are on these things. And I would say, that instead of thinking about God all the time, maybe you think about all these things with God. Because I'm kind of in an interactive sort of a thing. Whenever I'm seeing something like, wow, Lord, that's really amazing. And that's cool. Oh, it's so sad. But these things that Paul is encouraging, he's not just saying, hey, go on your own little thought tour. He's saying, these are things that you will find God in if you're looking for him in these things. It all depends on what you're looking for. And I think if you're looking in any of these directions that we have just talked about here, you will find God there if you're looking for him, because he's there all the time. So much beauty, so much rightness, so much purity. And it's out there. And Paul says, go find it. Focus your thoughts on those things. Let those begin to do their work. Cultivate a mindset in that direction. Are you hearing me? All right. So let's keep on moving here. The third thing that I think we see in this, and because the bookends of the peace of God and the God of peace in this section, I can't divorce peace from what Paul is saying. He is giving us a pathway and the habits and the patterns and the thought life of God's peace. And when he says this, I think one of the things that we can take from this is that peace is a team sport. That God's peace is a team sport. It's not just your simple little, oh, I'm so peaceful. It's not, you're not just all your little personal peace. That Paul's a mentor to them. And he has invested and invested and invested. He doesn't want them to try to do any of this alone. He knows that it's important for them to have older, more mature people that are modeling for them what it looks like to live in a way that's in sync with God and his kingdom. And so he says, whatever you have learned, and here are 4 things. Whatever you've learned, so I've taught you these things and you've learned them. Whatever you've received, I've given these things, and so you have them now. Whatever you've heard from me, you've listened, and you've seen in me, you've observed these things, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So Paul says, we need models. We need models who will challenge our thinking. Right? Hello? We need models and people who are more mature than we are that can challenge. Could you, Shannon, I have another visit. I was talking a while back with a young woman, and she had several times in the conversation had mentioned that, well, I'm an insecure person, and so this is how I interact with these different kind of things. And I thought, there was something just disturbing to me about that comment. Well, I'm an insecure person. And I felt like I heard the Lord say, when are you going to give up on that idea? And so I finally, in the conversation, I said, when are you going to give up on being an insecure person? And she was like, well, I didn't even know I had a choice about that. But because she was having a conversation with somebody that's out in the journey a little bit further than she is, they were able to challenge that bad thinking. I'm an insecure person is simply not true. Now, that doesn't mean that she might not struggle with insecurity here and there through the rest of her journey on earth. But that does not define her, period. Insecurity does not define her. Think about that for you. You and I, we need people in our lives that can speak truth into us, that can challenge the ways that we think that are not in sync with God and his kingdom, with his beauty and his love. And we need people in our lives. And so I want to ask you this morning, who is it that you have in your life that can speak into your world? Who can speak into your world? And if no one comes to mind, think about who you can go after and ask. Hey, would you be in my life enough? Can we walk enough? It doesn't mean that you're asking necessarily somebody to come and pour their entire life into you, although that isn't a bad thing. But it does mean that you have somebody that you're doing life with that's out ahead of you far enough that you can bounce things off of. You can submit your life to them. You can say, hey, what's your perspective on this? And am I on the right track or am I off? You do that, I want to tell you, your peace and your joy will return in spades. Because peace is a team sport. God didn't make you so that you could just individually figure all this out. He wants you figuring this out in community. And last thing, Paul says, think these things and put these things into practice. I love the way that Jesus concludes his foot washing in John 13, where Jesus, he strips himself down to his skivvies. He washes his disciples' feet, and they're all kind of flabbergasted. They don't know how to interact with this at all. And here's what Jesus says in concluding that whole thing. He said, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So Christianity is a think and do. We're not asking you to check your brains at the door when you come into here, so that you can just have an experience of God. And there's a lot of that in the body of Christ. And then there's also, on the other side, a check your feelings at the door. Check your emotions at the door. So you got no experience of God, but we got lots of simple brain stuff. It is both of these things. It is actually you thinking and you feeling and you doing. And so here are some suggestions in terms of how you might take what we've talked about this morning and put it into put some flesh on it. Firstly, think about what you want to think about. Think about what you want to think about. Paul has just listed this set of qualifications, these qualifiers of what a healthy and constructive and beautiful and peace-loving and peace-embracing thought focuses are. Think about what you want to think about and start thinking about those things instead of thinking about the other things. Are you hearing what I'm saying? But I'm suggesting that you actually make a list and check it twice, that you would make a list and that you would say, you know, these are the things that I observe that are pure in my life, and I want to think about those more, and I want to admire what is pure. And if you don't have any ideas about this, ask somebody more experienced in the faith than you, and if they can't give you any good answers, then ask somebody even older in the faith than them. But ask and decide what you're going to think about. Make a list and actually go after those things. Secondly, I want to say, and I'm trying to learn this myself and apply this. I've learned this a long time ago, but I'm still in the process of owning it. But pause runaway thoughts nearer to the start. When your anxious thoughts begin to run away from you, try to get them before they go all the way down the highway. Because the sooner that you start to get a hold of them and then redirect toward these things that Paul has said think about, the better off you'll be and the better off peace will be in you. The God of peace is always with you, but his peace, the peace of God, is something that you access by some of these dynamics. Thirdly, in this, entrust your struggles with somebody who's more mature than you and ask for help. Entrust. There's a lot of people who have walked with Christ in this room for a very long time. And so there's lots of people that you could share your life with in this, and it would be beautiful to do that. And people that are not exactly like you. That would even be cooler in this. Don't just find somebody who's exactly like you and has got everything figured out in the way that you think it needs to be. Maybe somebody that's a bit different than you. And see what they contribute and see how your peace and your joy begin to flourish. And then the last thing in this is, and this is, I'm admittedly drawing on some psychological principles in this, but I have found that when people are having a hard time with anxiety, that your breathing and focusing on your breathing and sinking and slowing that down with your breathing actually really helps. And so you could say, well, Bob, are you talking about yoga? Well, that's not bad. But what I'm saying is all the studies, just straight psychological studies show the link between your breathing and the direction that anxiety can take you. And that you beginning to slow down your breathing, fill up your lungs very slowly, exhale very slowly. And I have what I call my own little Jesus prayer that I do in this. And my inhale is Jesus. And my exhale is love. Jesus, love. Jesus, love. So after Stephen saved my bacon last week, yesterday, and the whole thing, I went back over on the side and I just sat and I just got my breathing and my anxiety back under kind of my feet underneath me by breathing in my Savior and reflecting on his love. Am I making sense to you? So, would you stand with me, please? I want to ask that if you are in a place of where you're anxious or whatever that you're anxious about, we're just going to take a moment and hand these things to him. But we first are going to identify what they are. We're going to kind of put them in our hands like we're giving the Lord a present. And for him, it's kind of a gift. But for us, it feels like, well, I'm good to offload this to you. And he's good to take it. So if you feel comfortable just opening up your hands like this and just picturing those things in your mind that you're anxious about. Maybe it's a relationship that's kind of gone sideways, or somebody that you really love that's really tanking and making bad choices. Or maybe it's your taxes, or maybe it's your employment, or whatever that it is. I want to ask that you would bring these things. We're going to bring them to Jesus. And I ask that you would just envision them in your hands. And Lord, we bring these things to you right now. And we offload these things to you. And we ask for your help. Some of these things we need a lot of help to manage. Other ones of these things, they just are overwhelming us. We don't have any idea what to do. But we bring all these things to you because you are near and you are the God of peace. As we cast our cares on you because you care for us, would you come and fill us with the peace of God that surpasses all understanding? Let this be a watershed moment where we lay down some things and we simply don't pick them back up. Receive these gifts that we give to you now, Lord. In Jesus' name.